Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Welcome. It is Wednesday, June 22nd. Our June is getting ready to go on her long-awaited vacation after many years, but she's still going to be on the chat box and with us in a minute. And Megan, you're not on vacation yet either, are you?
No, I'm not, but I am working hard with all these July takers. I love it. We've been busy with conferences and getting people prepped for the exam, which, Jackson, we are getting close to the 30-day countdown, aren't we?
We are. I think it starts maybe this weekend. So if you're a July bar taker, watch for Sunday's email. That will be the kickoff to all of this. And there'll be some other emails this week to just prep you and get you started. But I love the 30-day countdown, don't you?
I do too. I think it's nice to have just a little something every day to help motivate you and push you and know that you've got time. No matter where you are right now, there's time. We want to keep moving, but don't panic.
And don't panic is really the key word all the way through. We posted that in our community group this week. And I had the privilege of being on June's coaching call, her mindset coaching call last night with a big group of people. And we did some breathing exercises and some calming exercises. And it was great to see everybody. So that was awesome stuff. Today, we're going to answer some student questions. We've got a few. And then you and I, Megan, are going to wade into the deep waters of life estates in real property, right?
Yes, he is a well-known favorite of both of ours. Huh?
So I'm going to rely on you a lot, I think, today. We're going to do some sample MBE questions. We've got a mind map for you, and I think it'll be an interesting opportunity. So if you're at all intimidated by the subject of real property, stay with us. We're going to take one of the big parts of it. I think life estates are one of those things that really you get questions on in the bar exam, and I think you can manage them. I think what we're going to give you today is going to give you a structure that you can use pretty effectively. So stick around for that. Megan, I'll turn it over to you.
If you are a February student, we want to remind you about boot camp that's going to be happening in October in Florida, live, in person. Super, super exciting. Jackson, what are the details on when people need to get deposits in and all that to save their spot?
Yeah, you should be getting your deposits in now. We're only going to take 15 students into boot camp. So we've already got some people registered. The deposits are fully refundable, and then the balance will be due on September 10th. The boot camp is October 14th and 15th, I believe, here in Celebration. And again, only 15 people. So you put down your deposit. The deposit can be any amount you want, and then you pay the balance anytime you want before September 10th. And if you can't pay the balance or you don't want to, or you change your mind, you can withdraw and get back your deposit. So it's really a risk-free way to do it and to hold down your seat. Now, the more important part is that when we went back and looked at who's been at boot camp and how they did on the bar exam, most of those people passed. It makes a difference. And if you're at all sitting on the fence saying, I don't want to spend $2,000 for boot camp, I got to tell you, if I could tell you that you could trade $2,000 for passing the bar, I'm pretty sure most of you would do it. It makes a huge difference. We're going to teach you how to photo read. We're going to teach you how to mind map. We're going to teach you how to apply those skills. Megan is going to be doing small group, like no more than 5 people at a time, talking about writing essays and performance tests. June is going to be doing mindset coaching in groups of 5 or less. I'm going to do actual breakout sessions with, again, 5 people or less each time to talk about applying photo reading to essay writing and MBEs and performance tests. And we've got some special surprises coming for you as well. Everything is covered except your housing and your transportation. And I know lots of people can drive to Orlando area. That's also a great place to fly into. There's lots of affordable housing here. Absolutely should join us. So if you're taking the bar exam in February of 23 or July of 23, you should absolutely be here for boot camp. It is a very special experience. So make sure you do that. And I'm sure Jude can put the link up on the chat box for you to register. One question that comes up sometimes, people say, do I have to be a photo reader to attend? The answer is no. We will teach you how to photo read right there. If you are a photo reader, oh boy, prepare to put on your super blasters. We will go very fast.
Great. Wonderful. All right. Well, let's get to student questions before we try our best with a real property.
Yeah.
All right. A student who completed their first MBE test, which is the 1 through 25 subject specific multiple choice, and they did it online and said they wanted to do it under real exam time conditions and see all the answers at the end, but it shows the answers to every question after completion of each question. Is it possible to complete MBE tests under real exam conditions?
Yes, it is, but I don't want you to do it. There's a reason we've set it up the way we have. So let me talk about that first, and I'll tell you what the workaround is. The reason we want you to do a question and then see the answer explanation is that at that moment that you've just answered the question is when you have the best idea of why you answered it the way you did, and it's fresh in your mind. We then want you to take that answer explanation and put it into your notes, or ideally into your mind map. Then go to the next one and the next one. The purpose of the 25 questions is not predictive. That is, we don't care how many you get. I don't care if you get 0 right or 25. It doesn't change anything in terms of outcome ultimately. And therefore, as we talked about last week in the MBE tips, it's process, not outcome. So you don't need to do them that way. Now, if your purpose is to stay at 90 seconds a question, I'll just give you the hack that we've been using, which is take a 90-second sand egg timer. Just go buy it at the Costco, Walmart, or someplace, and just flip it every time that you're doing a question. Or if you're digital, turn on your phone and set a 90-second timer. That will work just as well, so that you get the timing aspect. Now, the workaround, if you need the workaround, is that you can always go to the digital copy of the personal trainer books. The questions are in the same order, and you do questions 1 through 25, and you will not have the answers right there, although you got to be careful, because I think the way we publish them, am I correct, Megan, is we've got the question, then the answer, then the question, then the answer.
We have over 800 MBE questions, and I cannot promise you that's the way that those particular ones are, but
okay. I think that's the way it is. So you got to take a piece of paper or something to hide the answer from yourself. So that's the workaround. But really, I don't want you doing these questions as real test questions at this point. You will have full-length test questions at the end, and that's where it gets predictive. Do you want to add anything to that?
I think, yeah, that right now, I understand that this person is saying, I want to do it under test conditions. You are literally, as they said, they just started, you are literally doing the very beginning, which is learning. You're taking 25 questions. You're not going to sit down and do 25 questions on the real exam. You're also not going to sit down and do 25 contracts questions in a row on the real exam. So you're just not at that phase yet, no matter what, of the review, because you're going to get there. You will do multiple choice full-length exams when you get much further into the course. And when you do that, Jackson, am I correct that then you're going to sit down and you're going to do even online on TestMoz, it will have you do the whole thing, and then you'll see the answers. And so you're going to get there. This is not the setup for everything, but it is for this initial piece. This is less about practicing. Of course, it's about practicing for the MBE, but it's really more about learning the subject and reinforcing the material at this point than it is sitting down and practicing for like test day on the MBE.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good distinction. When we get to the full-length mixed topic exams, those are presented to you like a regular MBE, no worries there. And of course, we're one of the few companies that provides our MBE questions in an online format, a digital format, and a written format. So you got lots of ways to work through the material. It's just up to you. But I think what Megan says is accurate.
All right, great. Next we have, I feel like this is a question, but maybe more of a comment. Jackson, maybe you can talk about paraliminals here with this and what they are. And this student said, paraliminal sessions seem to fly by. Any idea as to why listening for 20 minutes seems to be more like 8 minutes? So Jackson, what are paraliminals?
Yeah, it's a great question. Paraliminals are a product that you can add to your course. We curated a series of audio recordings with learning strategies on particular challenges that bar students might have. These recordings last 20 to 30 minutes in length, and they run 2 different soundtracks in the left and right ear. So you listen to them with your earbuds or headphones or whatever it might be. One of the soundtracks is going to the conscious brain, the other is going to the non-conscious brain. And the idea here is to get your conscious brain kind of out of the way and let your non-conscious listen and be given these statements and stories and visuals that help resolve a problem. So you might be dealing with anxiety or overwhelm or power thinking, or just trying to get to sleep at night or waking up refreshed. They're all different titles. And so what we do is we put together a package of 16 of these recordings, price them pretty affordably, less than you could get them from Learning Strategies. and then put them up, and you can put them in your permanent library. So what this student is doing is they're taking, let's say, the Overcoming Overwhelm Paraliminal, and they're putting on their headphones, and they sit down in the chair, and the next thing they know, a half an hour has gone by, and they've gone to sleep. There is a track in each of these Paraliminals called a sleep learning track. It is literally designed to put you into a theta brain state where your brain waves are so slow that you're sleeping. You feel like you're dreaming, and it just goes right by, and then it brings you back out of it, and you're like, what happened? Now, I do Paraliminals 3 or 4 times every single day, different recordings, just whatever's going on in a particular day. I did power thinking before we started today because I knew we had to talk about life estates. And I will fall asleep almost inevitably in that third track. So that's what's going on, is that the underlying technology, which is produced by a company called Holosync, which is a binaural wave that changes your brain waves, literally gets your brain waves to try and correlate from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere. And that's what creates this sort of internal meditation. Paraliminals are amazing. I highly recommend them to everyone. You can find them online in the course, and they're just a great resource and tool.
Wonderful. All right. Next up, we have a couple of questions about pacing. So first is, any advice on how I can speed up the pace in my coursework? Lectures are taking me quite a long time to get through because I'm stopping and going to jot down what you're saying so I don't miss anything. I've also sped up the pace.
Yeah, there's a couple of things you can do here. First of all, I think you just have to set the intention that you're going to finish in the time frame that each assignment is given to you. Now, that makes it impossible to stop and record or write down verbatim a lot of notes, or to take a lot of what I'm saying down. But you don't need that. And I think that's one of the misconceptions, don't you, Megan, that people get into, is that they think they've got to know everything that comes out of a lecture, and that's not the purpose of the lecture, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you certainly don't have to write down everything. And I get it. I felt that way. I remember trying to do that when I first started studying as well. It's just human nature. That's how we, especially with computers. I remember now, I feel like I went to law school now. I think I graduated 11 years ago. And even back then, I remember professors saying how much it had changed from even a few years before that, where when more people would handwrite notes, they would take notes, right? It was true note taking of, oh, that is an interesting thing, or here's a question that I'm writing down that I wasn't clear on, or here's something that I want to remind myself to check into later because I'm not sure I understood that. With computers, students, they would say, were more like transcriptionists, right? Like transcribing the entire lecture. So don't do that. I know it feels like that's what you feel like you should be doing, or it would be helpful. But I think really the big thing is, do you ever then go back and reread all your notes? We already have not a transcript of the lecture, but essentially all the information from the lecture is in the outline. So you already have a written document that you can go back to if there's something that was unclear from the lecture. But I think that what you want to do is just, if you can, let the lecture play and take true notes, right? Jot down questions that you have, write down a term. If you heard a term and you're like, I don't think I know what that is, or that wasn't clear to me, something that then you can go into the outline and do a deeper dive on. But you don't want to try to basically write everything that Jackson is saying in the lecture on just another document, right? That's not particularly helpful or a good use of your time.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons we want you to mind map, because it forces you out of that transcription mode. It forces you to actually think about the relationships and where things go. So that's another way to get at that. Still another way, if you're really looking for a hack, certainly PhotoReading will help you read faster and then give you time to do your notes. But then BarMaps is the other product. BarMaps gives you both the timestamped lectures. So you might say, you know what, I really want to dive into hearsay, but I'm not so interested in these other subjects. And you can go right to that piece and just watch that part of the lecture. Plus, it also includes the mind maps. Plus, it includes the fast finish audio lecture, which is the audio soundtrack to the lecture, air gapped, so that I don't sound like Donald Duck or Alvin the Chipmunk, but we take a 3-hour lecture and we make it an hour and a half, which is a really fast way to go through it. Now, will you be able to take extensive notes at that? Absolutely not. That's the goal. We're just trying to get it to your non-conscious. So there's a lot of different things here, but they all work to the same goal, which is we're trying to stay out of the conscious brain and be in the non-conscious with everything we do. And if you can do that, you're going to do better. I think what this student is trying to do is to learn it consciously, and that just doesn't work in this structure. That's why the big box courses put in 500, 600, 700 hours as a requirement, because they're trying to get you to learn it at the conscious level. We're trying to do it at a non-conscious level. That's what lets us cut down to 300 hours.
Great. All right. And the next pacing question, this is from someone in the chat box. Can we get an idea of what date we should be starting with the review section of the course by?
Yeah, July 10th. Watch my Sunday and Monday emails coming up next week when we get into the countdown. I will have lots of benchmarks as we go along. Now, having given you the benchmark, let me say, some of you will have a complete coronary when I say July 10th. You'll go, oh my God, I can't be there on July 10th. That's fine. If you get there on July 17th, that's fine. If you're there on July 1st, that's fine. It's a benchmark. That's all it is. But I know some people like to have that. So that's what we've learned is the best date. Gives you a couple weeks before the bar exam for review. If you finish later with your substantive study, the material's fresher to you anyway. You need less review. So don't worry.
Great. All right. Next this is an interesting question. This is someone who said, basically the senior attorneys in my department at work are encouraging me to apply for a new position there. Feel like it's a great opportunity, but it's going to take more time and it's going to impact my bar study. So what should I do?
Yeah, our response was we can't give you career advice, which is honest and true. However, the first priority, I think, should be feed your family, pursue your career, do all of those things. We don't put any pressure on you to take the bar exam on a specific date. There is no penalty to postpone. You can postpone as often as you want. You don't have to give us a reason. In fact, we don't care what the reason is. Just tell us you want to postpone and we'll take care of it. And the reason we do that is because we know that in the world that we're in today, things change. And if you get this opportunity, you ought to take it, in my view, and then work towards your bar study date. But if you can't make it, it's okay. Just push it back and take it later. I just don't think there's any magic to a particular date in the exam, at least right now. Now, when we get to 2025, I may have a different view of that. But today, I feel like they're all pretty much the same. What do you think, Megan?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a very specific, fact-specific question, but I think it's applicable for everyone when life is going to continue to happen as you're studying for the bar. I know that each of you know that because you've already run into things like that. And so our advice always is going to be, we created this course to be flexible for you. It's a really high value for us that we recognize that each one of you has a life outside of studying for the bar exam, and that we don't think that it's reasonable for your state bar to expect you to not live your life or to not continue to fulfill your other obligations that you have to your family, to your community, things like that, and to your work. So we very much know, and no matter what your particular situation is, we always want to encourage people that there's generally a way to work around it, and a way that you don't have to sacrifice all the rest of your life in order to just become someone who's passed the bar exam. That's always our goal, is to help you figure out, how do I balance this? Which I will say, if you need help with that, time management coaching is a great option if you're in a situation where your life is changing a bit and your schedule's changing a bit and you're feeling stressed about that. But always, we want to make sure that taking the bar exam is not the defining thing about who you are as a person, because there's so much more to each one of you, obviously, than the time you spend studying.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, great. Next question is from a newish photo reader, I think. They said, I'm taking my time and I haven't done the substantive portion of the photo reading as yet. In relation to what I'm doing now, it's challenging for me to photo read, especially on the computer. So any tips?
First of all, if you're a photo reader and you haven't done that initial call with me, go ahead and schedule that, because it's a good thing for us to be able to talk about. Couple of ideas. Once you've gotten through about lesson 4 of photo reading, you can go ahead and start photo reading your bar review materials. You've got enough tools and ability at that point. The other thing that you hear me say all the time is that you don't have to be technically proficient for photo reading to work. It works in spite of you. And therefore, you don't have to know how to do everything that Paul is teaching you in the photo reading course. So don't worry about that part. As to reading on the computer versus reading in hard copy, it's really exactly the same, and people psych themselves out about this. Reading a digital copy just means hitting page down. Your brain operates exactly the same way. You get exactly the same information. There's nothing different about it. And frankly, if you're like me, it's a whole lot easier to hit page down on the keyboard than it is to turn that page with my finger every time. I get so freaked out when I have to do that anymore in actual hard copy. So just give it a try, play with it a little bit. I think you'll find it works pretty easily and you'll be used to it. So the other part of this is if you're a new photo reader, go ahead and move through it and get into your bar study. Don't hold off on your bar study while you learn to photo read. It's an hour a day for 8 days while you're doing your bar study. It's not wait 8 days and then start your bar study. So I want to emphasize that.
Yes, definitely. All right, last question before we move into property. All right, question regarding essay practice. When we don't finish an essay within the time allotted, should we continue the essay until we're done, redo for another hour using what we've already written, or stop altogether, review the model answer, and move on to the next essay?
Yeah, I think that the best way to do it is just type a dotted line on your answer at an hour or 30 minutes or 45 minutes, depending on jurisdiction. Keep going and finish the assignment so you get the full value of the study and the substantive learning. And then go back afterwards and review. But then the other part of it is, and we talked about this on June's call last night, I call it the fluffy rule. What I say to people is, do you have a favorite pet or animal or child? If I ask Megan, she'd probably say Moose. And if I sent a ransom photo of Moose and I said, Megan, if you don't write this essay in 1 hour at 1,200 words, you're never going to see Moose again. Now, I'm pretty sure Megan could write that in an hour. And so what I tell people is take a picture of that person and put it up on your computer and call it the Moose rule or the fluffy rule or whatever it is, as a reminder that it's all about your incentive to get it done. So often when we're studying, we say to ourselves, just practice, and so I'll just take my time. But in fact, you want to practice under time conditions. I feel pretty strongly about that. What's your take there, Megan?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I agree. I always tell people to practice under time conditions, but I do often want them to finish the essay because it's important to practice and understand the law that's being tested, how you would actually write it, things like that. That being said, when we get into this, where we're almost a month out from the test, it can become a crutch for people that they keep thinking, they're just constantly letting themselves go over time and time again. And so I think there is something to be said for hitting a point of, and that's why I like the fluffy roll, the idea of putting your picture, your dog up there, something, forcing yourself to do it in an hour if you're in California, or 30 minutes in the UBE, 45 in Georgia, making sure that you get that muscle memory of how long that feels like. What does an hour feel like? What does 30 minutes feel like? And then getting that very comfortable with how quickly that time goes and cutting you've been depending maybe too much on that safety net, and you are going to hit a point where you need to let it go and try it without, and you might fall and you might be like, man, I really didn't do very well. But again, you're still in practice. So it's still, this is the time that you want to make those mistakes so that on exam day, you are ready. But what you don't want is you don't want to have the exam be the first time that you've actually done it in an hour or you've done it in 30 minutes. You want to have gotten to a place of, I'm doing it consistently in time every time before you get to exam day.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
All right. Got any other questions?
Nope, that's it. So let's move on to, we're going to move on to life estates now in real property and go over, Jackson's going to talk us through the mind map or the portion of the mind map, and then we'll do a couple questions.
Yeah, we talk about the study questions that keep you awake. And I have to say, when Megan proposed life estates to me this week, I stayed awake. I was trying to figure out, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with that? That's a big topic, but I think it's a good one to talk about. And so what we want to look at today is how life estate rules in real property are actually applied on the MBE. And Megan, do you want to talk a little bit about why we picked this particular subject for today's discussion?
Yeah, sure. I think the first is that I'm going through subject by subject with these to make sure that we hit all of them and we don't have my unconscious bias of not liking things like property affecting my choices. But in terms of why I picked life estates particularly, is this is something that you're gonna see on the test, like just pretty much 100%. This is gonna come up. It's a really big topic, but I did try to narrow down and pick some questions that are a little bit more specific. So you'll see when Jackson goes through the mind map portions for this, that we're not talking about everything in life estates, but tried to hit a couple of things that are pretty common, honestly, on the MBE and that you're likely to see in an essay as well.
Yeah, good. So as we've been doing, we're going to start with a mind map, and this mind map will be downloaded into your course materials by the weekend. It'll be in your real property as an optional assignment along with this recording. If you're not a student in our course, you can obtain these through a special program that we've got, and we will link to that. But this is a great way for you to at least get a sense of what we've got. And if you're in BarMaps, if you've got the BarMaps product, you will find this. This particular mind map is part of the property mind map, and then the sub mind map is present estates. And we are actually looking at life estates. And as Megan said, we're not going to cover everything that's in the mind map, but I wanted to talk about a couple of things. When we looked at the questions that we wanted to engage in for present estates and life estates, we wanted to focus in on two things. The first was the creation, the nature, and the characteristics. And then the second were the rights of possession and use. And so here's the larger mind map. Actually, there's more to it than even this, but I wanted to give you all this picture first, and then we'll take a little more in-depth look. So in present estate, we wanted to look, as I said, at the creation, the nature, and the characteristics of life estates. And then we wanted to look at the rights of possession and the rights of use. So those are the two broad categories. When we talk about creation, nature, and characteristics, the first thing that we need to know is that a life estate, when we're talking about it, the duration of a life estate is always measured by the lifetime of a person. Now, that might seem to you to be a very simple, obvious rule, but as we get into these questions, you're going to find that rule actually is pretty significant, isn't it, Megan?
Yeah, I think that is maybe one of the most foundational pieces to a life estate. And like you said, it can seem so obvious, but man, it's so easy to lose sight of it. So we really just wanted to drill it into people, and you'll see it on the questions and the way that it functions, that don't lose sight, don't get bogged down in sort of other details and things that can trick you or throw you off. Just keep that in mind, that the duration is measured by the lifetime of that specific person, despite any other sort of noise that can.
Yeah, there's a lot of distractors here. They do a lot of things to try and move you off of that basic principle. So that's a big one to remember. Another basic principle is going to have to do with how do you figure out what the measuring lives are when you've got joint recipients of a life estate. And the key item here to understand is that the life estate will persist until the death of the last survivor. So when you've got joint measuring lives, you're going to go out to the death of the last survivor. Again, you're going to see a lot of distraction here, a lot of noise, as Megan put it, but that's the principal rule that you want to be aware of. Then the third topic is one that is going to get a lot of play in the questions. We're going to deal with it as well today. It's called the life estate per autre vie. That simply means the life of another. And the way that you would know this is you would see language that says 2A for the life of B. That's a life estate per autre vie, 2A for the life of B. Well, so what are we supposed to do there? We measure it by the life of B in that case, or the grantor. And then we also look at A and say, all right, you have it for the life of B. But if we had a grant that said 2A for life or 20 years, that's not a life estate because A could die, or we could have 20 years and A is still alive. So you've got to be aware of this language, and you want to look at it fairly carefully. Now, when you have a life estate per autre vie, it can be qualified by a non-time limitation. So an example of this would be 2A for life, or until she divorces. And so that's the grant, 2A for life or until she divorces. What that does is create a qualified life estate in A, and you're going to see some examples of that as well. So there are these different kinds of grants that come out. And I think in your mind map, and you'll see it in the more detailed one we've actually posted, we've got some of that actual granting language. And that's helpful to have, isn't it, Megan?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then the last kind of discussion of creation is that sometimes you can create a life estate by law, and this would be a marital estate. And we're not going to deal much with that today. We just wanted you to be aware of it. So those are the broad areas in the creation, nature, and characteristics, some very basic principles, but then the life estate per autre vie, I think, is something you're going to want to tap into. Anything you want to add to that before we go to the next slide?
No, I think that's great.
All right, let's keep moving then. So our next slide has to do with the rights of possession and use. And let me just say, you're going to see a whole lot of items here at the middle down about committing waste and paying taxes, paying interest on the mortgage and insurance. Those are all interesting things. They are not areas that we are covering today. I will say there are a fair number of questions about waste. That's why we put in all of those categories, but it is not something that you need to be working with today. Now, where we are going to focus is more on the right of possession up at the very top. And what we've got is that life tenants have limited rights in the property, right? If you're a life tenant, you have a limited right in the property. So what are those rights? One of them is a right of possession. And the right of possession means that you can collect rents and profits. You have the right to evict someone. You have the right to sue for damages. So even if you're a life tenant, you do have some rights in the property. And that's important to remember because sometimes we lose sight of that and we say, they're just a life tenant. They couldn't have anything. That's not true. They have certainly those rights. One of the most important rights for a life tenant is the right of alienation. Now, what this means is that a life tenant can lease, sell, or mortgage their interest. That's surprising, isn't it? You'd say they've only got a right of alienation, so they can't give away more than they own. And that's true. They can't grant more than they own yet, just so you know. So we've got the right of alienation. You can lease, sell, or mortgage your interest, but you can't give away more than you own. And this right of alienation is pretty heavily tested, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a big one. The right, I would say in general, this kind of stuff, the rights of the life tenants, you're very likely to see questions about this.
Yeah. And so we have the right of possession, we have the right of alienation, then we have the right to sue for a breach of, that is another item. We have related rights of enjoyment. All of those are part of the limited rights of life tenants. Now, in terms of the other rights of possession that are down here, you'll see that we have rights in fixtures and in division of proceeds and so on. These are all interesting areas, but not ones that we are going to cover today. So just be aware of them, but you can see how big the topic is. But what we've tried to do is focus in primarily on these rights of possession and rights of alienation. I think those are important ones for this particular part of the topic. Okay. The other thing I would just point out is that obviously there are other parts of the present estate discussion, and you will see all of those in your outline and in the mind map. Okay, we good?
Yep.
All right, we ready to do a question?
I think so.
All right, strap in. Here we go. Question number 1. Oscar, the owner of Blackacre, deeded Blackacre to A for life and then to B and C in equal shares. The grant also provided that A shall not have the power to alienate his life estate. In the event that B or C shall attempt to alienate her remainder interest before it becomes possessory, then the remainder interest shall vest entirely in the person who did not attempt to alienate her interest. That finishes the quote. 1 year after the deed, A deeded his life estate to D, as in dog, and B, as in Betty, deeded her remainder interest to E. What is the state of the title to Blackacre after the actions by A and B? Oh my, Megan, what do we do here?
I think first you have to figure out who all of your parties are.
Yeah.
And what their relationships are to each other in terms of who's deeding what to whom and what restraints are there on that, things like that. So for me, I like to just write a little note on the side.
O is granting to A for granting O goes to A for life, then to B and C. So we got that note. And then we know that O can't alienate, but if B or C attempts to alienate their remainder interest, then that vests in the person who didn't attempt to alienate their interest. And then A deeds the life estate that they've got to D, and B deeds their remainder interest to E. So actually just graphing this one out, writing it out will actually help you figure it out. Don't you think?
Yes, I think definitely. Otherwise, there's too many parties and it's too confusing to fit in your head.
And so I think you need to do this before you look at the answer choices in order to get the idea. And this is a different kind of approach to selective intuition. It requires you to do a little bit more work, but I think it'll make the answer easier for you. So let's look at what we've got here. The question is, what's the state of the title to Blackacre after the actions by A and B? Answer choice A says that A is the holder of a life estate and C holds a vested remainder. Answer choice B says that A is the holder of a life estate and E and C hold vested remainder as tenants in common. Choice C says D is the holder of a life estate per outre V and C holds a vested remainder. And answer choice D says D is the holder of a life estate per outre V and E and C hold a vested remainder as tenants in common. Now, as you look at those 4 answer choices, that the first 2 choices start with A being a holder of a life estate, And the last two talk about D being the holder of a life estate. So it seems to me the first thing you should do in selective intuition is to attempt to determine whether or not A is the holder of a life estate or D is the holder of a life estate. So here's our question. Okay. So again, we've got O to A for life, then to B and C. And then A can't alienate their life estate, and skip down, but A does deed their life estate to D, and B deeds their remainder interest to E. So the question is, was A able to deed their life estate to D in spite of the grant? Okay.
I'll narrow it down for you immediately to just two possibilities, depending on which one you come up with.
I think so. Okay. Tell us what you think. And then once you've made the decision about whether A or D is the holder of the life estate, then really the only question you have to ask is, do we have C as a vested, holding a vested remainder, or E and C holding vested remainders as tenants in common? So actually you can break this into a couple of separate questions, right? And deal with them that way. We got that? Let's see what we got here. Answer choice A said that A was the holder of a life estate and C holds a vested remainder. And that is the incorrect answer. So a disabling restraint on alienation is always invalid, even with a life estate. Interesting. So what that tells us is that A's transfer to D created in D a valid estate per Otra V. So we know that choices A and B are going to be wrong. Now, this is an important test here, or rule, because you can't put a disabling restraint on an alienation. So while forfeiture restraints are valid in general, any restraint on the alienability of a fee simple is invalid. As a result, the transfer of B's vested remainder to E is going to be effective. So D is the holder of a life estate per Otra V for the life of A, and what you're going to find is that E and C hold a vested remainder as tenants in common. So we can tell you then that answer choice B was wrong because A is not the holder of the life estate. We know answer C is incorrect for the reason we just described. E holds B's vested remainder. And because E has got now a vested remainder, what does that mean in this situation? Answer D is our correct answer. And the reason for that is that in this situation, B's vested remainder to E is effective and they hold it as joint tenants in common. Okay, are we good?
Hopefully that made sense. So there's basically the two questions, which I feel like people got.
Yeah.
The first one, right?
Yeah.
They understood that the, what is it? A had the right to transfer to D.
Yeah.
Right. Where people got mixed up, I think, was with the second piece and what E and C could or could not do and where they stood at that.
Yeah. A restraint on the alienability of a fee simple is going to be invalid. So even though this language was in the grant, it simply it wasn't going to hold. You can alienate the grant that you've got or the fee simple. Okay. All right. So now we're ready to do question number 2.
Yes, let's do it.
All right. Let's go to question 2. Oh, a short question. Oh, thank goodness. Question 2, Owen grants Blackacre, quote, to L for life, remainder to R. R, with L's permission, builds a house on Blackacre and lives in it without paying rent for 25 years, at which time L brings an action to evict R. The most likely result of that eviction action is, all right, now I think this is one where you're going to be able to do a whole lot here as long as you don't get too distracted. It's a short question. We know that we've got a life estate to L and a remainder to R, but R then builds a house and lives in it, doesn't pay rent, and L brings an action to evict R. Remember, R is a remainder. So what's going to happen? All right, so not terribly complicated, but here's where the answer choices can screw you up, correct?
Yes, I think so. So that's why it's helpful to stop before you look at the answer choices and think in your head, what do you think is the right answer before you get swayed necessarily by the answer choices?
Yeah, you think L is going to be able to evict R. That's the first question you want to ask. So answer choice A says L will prevail because he's entitled to possession. Answer choice B says L will prevail only if he reimburses R for the cost of the house. C, R will prevail because R has acquired title by adverse possession. And D, R will prevail because L surrendered his life estate. So will L prevail or R prevail? That's the first question that you have to ask. And then you have to figure out what the reason is behind that. So what I would do here from a selective intuition position is just make that first decision. Does L prevail or R prevail? And then look at your answer choices to narrow it down from there, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Now we have a seductively wrong answer here. I will tell you that. So let's see what happens. Answer choice A was right. The suspense has all gone away. L will prevail because he's entitled to possession. The grant created a life estate in L with a remainder in R. Now, the fact that L permits R to occupy during part of the life estate never affects L's status or rights as a life tenant. Remember, we said that life tenants are entitled to possession and they can recover. And in this case, you can recover the property from R along with the improvements that were in question. Our status as a remainder doesn't change anything, does it?
Correct.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people can wrap themselves around that and say, R is a remainderman, so don't they have something? No, they have nothing. They were just there and they didn't pay rent. So in this case, L has the right to repossess. Remember, we said that's one of the rights of possession and use. So we wanted to be clear on that. They have the right to evict this. Answer choice B said L will prevail only if he reimburses R for the cost of the house. R could make a claim for some of the benefit conferred on L by R's construction, but can't recover the full cost of the house. And the reason for this is that R has already benefited from using the house, and as the remainderman would regain possession once L dies and the life estate terminates. So I think that what we've got here is you'd have to overread this question to make this your correct answer. So if you chose B, I think you did too much thinking, right?
Yeah, I think this one is interesting because I can see why some people picked it for sure. It feels right. It feels like, gosh, but he built a house on it, so you shouldn't get penalized for that.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's a legal theory for it. It's more of
No, it's equitable.
I feel that way. So
Yes.
just always be aware of that you do want to listen, of course, to your gut with some of these things, but make sure, hey, is there a legal rationale that can back me up here?
Yeah, and here's the test taking key. He'll prevail only if. That only if makes it the wrong answer. It would have been the right answer if we'd say L will prevail if he reimburses for the cost of the house, or may prevail if he reimburses for the cost of the house.
Yeah.
That makes it a better answer, but only if, no way, because that isn't going to happen. As Megan says, it's not a legal solution, it's an equitable solution. All right, our next answer was the one that I thought a lot of people would jump on, that R would prevail because they've acquired the title by adverse possession. But this is not adverse possession, was it?
Right, exactly. So I'm really proud of everybody for not going down that path. I think this is the one that they're trying to trick. You'll see sometimes where they put in a legal term because it just can jump out at you and feel like, well, it must be there, because it feels, oh yeah, he was there for 25 years and he never paid rent and now he's getting kicked off and he wants to be right. How could I keep him on there? Oh, I could keep them on by saying adverse possession. I've been here too long for you to kick me off. So good job, guys, for not falling for that.
Yeah, and the reason that it's not adverse possession is he never got title, and that's how adverse possession works. It was not adverse at all. He occupied it with his permission. That's what makes it the wrong answer. And answer choice D, R will prevail because L surrendered his life estate. No, that is actually contrary to the facts. L simply gave R permission to build and occupy a house. There was no conveyance or surrender of the estate that L held over to R. So again, equity, you might use equity to prevent the estate holder from claiming rights that he voluntarily waived. But this short fact pattern just doesn't give us enough information to amount to an intentional waiver by L of his possessory rights. So again, if you answered choice D, I think you overread the problem. Okay. All right. Question number 3. Again, a fairly short question, but not necessarily an easy one. O in his will specifically devised Blackacre, quote, to A for life and then to the children of B and their heirs. At O's death, C, the only child of B, was alive, but C predeceased A, dying intestate. B survived A and is capable of having children. Here's the call to the question. If at A's death, B is still alive, who's entitled to possession of Blackacre? I think this is the kind of question that most people just completely clench up over, don't you?
Yeah, it's a complicated one. It's another one where I would make just a really fast little chart or something with arrows about who's the heir of who and when are people dying. So sometimes people like to make a little timeline, or you could X out anybody who's dead in the fact pattern. I think that can be helpful to keep track of who's related to who in what way and who is alive and who is dead by the end of our question.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, we've got A as a life tenant, right? But then the grant goes to the children of B and their heirs. But at O's death, B is alive and their only heir, C, is alive but predeceases A and dies intestate. B survives A and they're capable of having children. So when A dies, so when the life estate ends, and now what happens? B is still alive, so who's entitled to possession? If you're completely lost at that point, this is where you can look at the answer choices to start to get some clarity and to narrow it down, I think. So let's look at that. Answer choice A says that the residuary beneficiaries of O's estate. So the question was, if at A's death, B is still alive, who's entitled to possession of Blackacre? And A says the residuary beneficiaries of O's estate. Choice B says C's heirs and any additional children of B whenever born. C says just C's heirs. And D says C's heirs and any additional children of B born before the death of A. All right, what do you do with this, Megan?
I think this is where we come down to what we talked about at the beginning, where the key thing to keep in mind with life estates is whose life are we counting by?
Yeah.
So get that straight in your head with this. Whose life are we measuring this life estate by?
Yeah.
That is like maybe the most important question anytime you have a life estate. Whose life are we measuring by? Let that help you.
Yeah, yeah. And whose life are we measuring by here?
To A for life.
Yeah.
So A.
Okay. So at A's death, B is still alive, right? And we know that B survived A, duh. B is still capable of having children. C was alive but predeceased A, okay? So remember at A's death then, that means C is dead. So all we've got are C's heirs, okay? All right. So let's look at the choices again. Notice also that answer choice A is very different than answer choices B, C, and D. Okay, totally different. All right.
This one's a little scary for people.
So this one's scary. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you get scared of a question, this is where you close your eyes, take a deep breath, and say, what feels right to me? A, B, C, or D? Take a guess. Well, let's see what we've got here. Answer choice A says if A's death, B is still alive, who's entitled to possession of Blackacre? Answer choice A said the residuary beneficiaries of O's estate. That is incorrect. The residuary beneficiaries would take it only if no one were capable of taking Blackacre after the life estate. That clearly does not occur here. For that to happen, the remainder interest in B's children would have had to fail completely. I'm not going to go down that path, but just so you know, that's just not going to happen. So in my mind, that's an easy one to eliminate. Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
If at A's death, B is still alive, who's entitled to possession of Blackacre? Answer choice B said C's heirs and any additional children of B whenever born. This is incorrect. At the death of A's, C's heirs can go into possession. What does that mean? It means the class closes at A's death. Why is that? Because the duration is measured by the lifetime of a person. And so B is going to be incorrect. So keep that in mind. The class closes at A's death. That's the principle we want. Would you agree?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, all right. Answer choice C said that who's entitled to possession of Blackacre? C's heirs. Nope, that's incorrect. It fails to recognize that the gift is a class gift. And the class doesn't close until the death of either A or B. So any children that were born to B before the death of A could share in the gift with C's heirs. But B hasn't died yet, so the class can't close. But since there's no precondition here that a child of B survive, or B or O for that matter, then the interest of a child of B vests and becomes legally capable of possession at its birth. So C's interest vested at C's birth. Now, you may have to unpack that a little bit to understand why it's the wrong answer, but let me just say this. This is not a rule against perpetuities problem. This is about when classes close, and you have to be aware that you can't read in things like preconditions here. It is what they tell you it is. Anything you want to add to that answer explanation?
No, I think that's a really great way of putting it. Yeah.
All right. And so answer choice D is our correct answer. The answer choice said C's heirs and any additional children of B born before the death of A. So the reason that they're going to share in the gift is that there's nothing in the question to indicate that O intended to include all of B's children whenever born in the gift. And so as a result, anyone that was born before their death that is going to be included along with C's heirs. So it's actually a matter of just working your way through step by step and getting down to these last pieces so that you can evaluate the problem. So that's what we are looking at there. I know that's not an easy question for sure, but I think it's good to have that experience in working through those and to also see that I think most of you probably were a little panicked when you saw that question. And so figuring out that you can actually work through it is a good thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully this makes sense. And even if you got them wrong, remember that's the point of this, is that it's to learn. And so now when you see a life estate, it's going to be more ingrained in your head because we did this review of it. So it's reinforcing information that you've been working on. So
Yeah,
great
and
job.
again, for those of you that have BarMaps, this mind map is already loaded in. You can find it. For everyone in the course, you will find it when we post this lecture as an optional lecture in real property, and that would be by this weekend. And if you're not in our course and you're just listening to this on our podcast, we encourage you to get in our course so that you can get all of these cool tools. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Megan, thank you for guiding us through life estates. Not an easy thing to do. I can hardly wait to see what you come up with for next week. June, have a safe and wonderful trip. We will see you in a couple of weeks. We will miss you, but I know you're going to have a great time. And for all of you who are studying, stay with it. We are just about to hit the 30-day window. By the time we see you next week, we'll be inside that window. And boy, it gets real then. So have a great study week. Keep going, everybody. Do well. And we'll talk to you next Wednesday. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.